Dark Messiah. It's a Might and Magic game. You know Might and Magic games, right? PC classics. There's like 1,000 of them. You know, these, and these. And this. Yeah, I personally have fond memories of playing Heroes of Might and Magic games with my siblings when I was younger. Huddled around the family PC, strategically planning the demise of one another while forming uneasy alliances behind the backs of the other one. Great times. Not all Might and Magic games are good though, don't get me wrong. I also have some not so fond memories of, this monstrosity. I even committed the cardinal sin of playing that one on the PlayStation 1. If I had been a PC gamer back then, that membership card would have spontaneously combusted in my fingertips. Dark Messiah, however, I'd never played before. I actually remember it quite well launching back in 2006 to some critical acclaim. The biggest praise I really remember everyone giving it was how cool and inventive the combat was. And let's keep in mind, this is an Arcane Studios game. You know, the people who would eventually bring about the Dishonored franchise. So diving into this, I was pretty optimistic. But the other thing I remembered was this game being largely ignored overall and eventually fading into semi-obscurity. But why? Okay, I get it. Thank you. We good? Thanks. Go! Yeah, alright, that makes sense. The shadow of Oblivion is a bit hard to escape, and giant open world games weren't quite the dime a dozen that they are now. Alright, well, let's see if Dark Messiah Might and Magic deserves its status as a cult gem.
Sareth, my faithful disciple, your father would be proud to see you this day.
Ooh.
Initiated into the arts of magic. A fierce
boy.
and noble.
That's voice acting. Oh, sorry. Continue.
I'm sending you to the free city of Stonehelm to meet a wizard named Menelag. He and I have certain mutual interests. Right now, he's looking for an artifact called the Skull of Shadows.
All right, just hear me out. I understand Skull of Shadows, very, very important magical artifact, but let's just say, like, what if Erevold the Wise needs our help getting the magical artifact known as the Tree Branch of Enlightenment? I mean, we wouldn't want that to fall into the wrong hands. Imagine if the Tree Branch of Enlightenment fell into evildoers' hands. Then the land of Delricia will be put into peril that we never know, especially if Evil Armand the bald with the big ears, kind of looks like Dean, my editor, gets a hold of the item. Then what are we supposed to do? Alright, so maybe it's safe to say the story isn't award-winning.
What is your bidding, my master?
Oh, hey there. Spoke too soon. Is that my new companion? Ooh la la. Oh, she just possesses me? I have never been so let down so quickly in my entire life. Alright, well, we got our generic fantasy mission. Get a magic artifact to do something that helps the world, but first off to a town to meet up with Menelag, while being possessed by a hot waifu. I don't know if I hate or love saying waifu, but I feel like I kind of love it more than I hate it. Anyway, could be worse. Off we go into town. Maybe we'll get to do some shopping, explore the world a little bit, learn a bit about... Alright, yeah, that could happen too. Run! Shortly after that little escape all the undead scenario, which ends in a glorious shoot the eye of the undead Cyclops with the ballista moment, the game finally gives you the tools to fight back. Like, all the tools. Seriously, a sword and shield, a bow and quiver, a staff, magic spells, daggers, and most importantly, your own damn foot. Yeah, we'll get to that in a bit. It also finally unlocks a skill system, and the game reveals itself for what it is. A medieval Doom, which, yeah, I realize is reductive as hell. But the game will follow a pretty simple formula from this point on. Introduce level via cinematic, drop player into said level, and tell them to get from point A to point B and murder everything in your way. But let's not forget, this is an Arcane Studios game, and while this is years before Dishonored would signal boost their name, it's very clear this is one of their games. While each level is relatively straightforward, they are still filled with secrets to explore, providing you with ample things to discover and neat gear to equip yourself with. The levels themselves are varied and exciting to look at, and while the story itself may not be anything special, the arenas and levels they have you explore are plenty to keep you interested in continuing forward. While stuffed with secrets, they also all have interesting puzzles that help break up the combat, as well as make you think. And a lot of them are physics-based puzzles, which, this being the Source engine, is all but expected. But moreover, the combat is pure Arcane Studios. Well, it's pure primitive Arcane Studios, at least. Dark Messiah very proudly displays its combat system front and center. It is the selling point of this game, and that is very clear from the start. While 6 months after the launch of Dark Messiah, we'd get Oblivion and its weird, floaty, semi-skill-based combat with broken magic and nonsense collision detection, Dark Messiah was more about giving the player options and having the environment interact with those options. And a simple example could be seeing a bunch of enemies under a precariously placed balcony filled with crates. One good sword swing and the whole thing comes crashing down on your opponents, killing them all easily. Or how about a giant chandelier being held up to the ceiling with a measly amount of rope? Cut the rope and watch chaos ensue. That hurt. Then you have your magic, quintessential fire and ice spells. A big ramp filled with enemies? How about ice the ground beneath their feet and watch them all fall and trip over themselves while you pepper them with fireballs? Dishonored may have been littered with options to tackle quests and use your powers however you want to make it happen, but Dark Messiah so very clearly was the birth of that idea. There was only one problem with the whole thing. They gave you your foot. This game is built with the Source engine, and damn if there isn't some weird secret contract in the early 2000s that dictate developers have to use said physics to be part of the game if you plan on using it. And listen, if you have a weird fetish, and there's no kink shaming here, for the dude kicking the other dude down the hole in the movie 300, then Dark Messiah will be the only jerk-off material you'll ever need for the rest of your life. By the end of the game, I'd become so reliant on kicking enemies, I would just kite them into areas where there were death traps or water or literally anything dangerous, circle strafe around them, and kick them into it. It's both wildly empowering and totally destructive to the combat. While the game gives you a variety of ways to fight, and a lot of them are fun, you do quickly realize how troublesome it can be to set up this big plan and how you're gonna defeat the enemies in the next room, just to fail and resort to your standard fare. And my standard fare in most fantasy games is melee. And hot damn is this game a janky mess when it comes to melee combat. Sure, it might be a lot better than, say, Oblivion was at the time, with the blows actually landing and enemies giving you feedback as they get hit. And some skill is needed to block enemy swings and use directional attacks to hit areas that they weren't actually guarding. But your character has a tendency to look all over the place when the swing is taking place. Moreover, I can't help but feel that my hero's limbs are made out of semi-al dente spaghetti, weirdly floppy when not in combat and overly stiff when in combat. And who the hell runs like this? And while I realize most people say to play with magic because magic is the most fun you can have playing the game, while toying with magic, I still found myself falling back on the tried and true kick an enemy into something deadly. It may sound like a weird nitpick, but when playing the game, you really can't help but feel like you don't have nearly as fine a control over your character as you wish you did. He oddly felt heavy and unwieldy, and this is particularly noticeable during any platforming section where you're required to jump over and platform and hope you reach your destination without falling to your death down some bottomless pit. It's a shame because if the character didn't feel so janky in action and the overpowered kick from hell didn't exist, the combat would be completely standout even by today's standards. And I can't help but wonder if this is the developer's problem or the engine's problem, because in the end, a lot of Source Engine games do feel relatively similar. I ended up neglecting all the extra cool things I spent my skill points on just so I could continue to kick brain-dead enemies into walls of spikes that his other 4 friends died on right in front of him. You'd think he'd catch on to my antics after the first one of his companions got kicked into it, before them hanging on the wall of spikes didn't stop him from circling around me until he was perfectly lined up for the punt of the century. I do kinda wish though that I'd found this game and played it back when it released, because I do see why it's gathered a cult following nowadays. Imagine this kind of combat mixed into a game like Oblivion with today's polish and budget. That'd be a hell of an open world game, and one I could easily get excited for. But as it stands today, Dark Messiah just hasn't aged all that well. A story that is completely forgettable with voice acting straight out of the budget bin. And a combat that has its moments, sure, but mostly becomes a 300 simulator, and I'm left wanting more from this little endeavor. There are some amazing set pieces to behold though, and it can and does invoke awe and wonder occasionally. There's some moments in here where I can see the brilliance in combat and design, but more often than not, Dark Messiah tends to come across as a really fleshed out proof of concept for what would eventually become the Dishonored franchise. So, did I have fun with Dark Messiah Might and Magic? Yeah, I'd say I'd had a good time. There were moments of brilliance in this game, and like I said, if you're willing to overlook the really overpowered stuff that they give you and exploiting kind of a dumb AI, there's a lot of fun to be had messing with the physics and the magic and setting up traps of your own for each individual encounter, and then dealing with it as they go correct or they may go horribly awry. But Dark Messiah still feels to me kind of like a prototype for what would eventually become Dishonored. So, what do I, the Honorable Judge Mathas, rate this game? Well, I judge it innocent. At the time, in 2006, this game was probably really fun with a lot of innovation and some neat mechanics, but it got utterly destroyed by the juggernaut that would be Oblivion 6 months later. It barely had time to really live a life of its own as a video game, and it's not its fault. Much like Oblivion, Dark Messiah hasn't aged all that well, but its combat mechanics probably did age better than the Elder Scrolls ones did. Now, if only Bethesda would stop giving us Skyrim on every port known to man, and maybe we get a new game. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. My question to you is this: what's your favorite fantasy RPG out there? Console, PC, doesn't matter. Your favorite fantasy RPG, modern, retro, I want to hear them all. As always, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters for making this show possible, and to everybody who watches this video, thank you so much for your support, and I hope you enjoyed, like I said. And as always, I'll see all of you next time. Bye-bye.